Welcome to the Expensive Coins History channel. Most people think they understand pennies. They hear the word and their mind immediately dismisses it as something small, something ordinary, something no longer worth attention. A penny is what sits forgotten in a drawer, lost between car seats, or dropped without a second thought at a checkout counter. For decades, that belief has been reinforced by habit, by routine, by repetition. And yet history has a way of hiding its most important stories inside the smallest objects. The Lincoln 1-cent coin has been in circulation for over a century. It has passed through wars, economic collapses, booms, social revolutions, and technological ages. It has been carried in the pockets of factory workers, soldiers, farmers, businessmen, and fathers trying to make ends meet. Every generation has touched it, but very few have ever truly looked at it. That is where the story begins. Because in 1982, something happened that most Americans never noticed at the time. There was no announcement.
No ceremony.
No headline warning people that a quiet line had just been crossed. The change happened silently inside the system, driven by pressure, cost, and necessity. And today, that moment has become one of the most important turning points in modern American coinage. The year 1982 stands apart in penny history. Not because of design, not because of a new portrait, but because it represents a fracture. A year where old metal met new economics, where tradition collided with survival. Before 1982, pennies were made primarily of copper. Real copper, heavy in the hand, solid, honest, the kind of metal that reflected the industrial backbone of a nation that still manufactured, still built, still mined, still produced. But by the early 1980s, copper prices had risen sharply. The cost to produce a single penny was approaching, and in some cases exceeding, its face value. That is when the system changed. The United States Mint quietly transitioned to a new composition. Zinc became the core, coated with a thin layer of copper. To the naked eye, the penny looked the same. To the public, nothing appeared different. But internally, the coin had crossed a line. It was no longer what it had been for generations. 1982 became a transitional year, and transitional years are where rarity is born. Multiple compositions were struck. Multiple varieties existed simultaneously. Different weights, different metal cores, different production realities happening at the same time, often without clear separation. It was confusion disguised as normalcy. And within that confusion, certain coins slipped through that were never meant to be ordinary. The 1982 D. Lincoln cent is one of them. Struck at the Denver Mint, this coin was produced during a period of immense pressure. The mint was adjusting equipment, changing metal supplies, recalibrating machinery, and attempting to meet circulation demand while costs spiraled. In such environments, precision suffers. Variations occur. Mistakes happen. And sometimes, history is minted unintentionally. At first glance, a 1982 D penny looks unremarkable. Lincoln's familiar profile faces right, calm and resolute, as it has since 1909. The date sits quietly beneath him. The small D mint mark rests near the date, understated, almost apologetic. There is no dramatic flourish, no immediate signal of importance. That is precisely why so many were overlooked. Collectors at the time were not hunting these coins. The public was unaware. Pennies moved through circulation at lightning speed. Millions vanished into vending machines, tip jars, and bank rolls without ever being examined. But time has a way of sharpening focus. As years passed, specialists began weighing pennies, measuring them, comparing sound, feel, and surface response. What they discovered was unsettling. Some 1982 D pennies did not behave like the others. They carried the weight of the past in a year that was supposed to represent change. The copper-based versions from this transitional year were never intended to be produced in large quantities. Yet they existed, and not in theory, in reality. That is when the conversation shifted. Because rarity is not always about low mintage numbers printed in a ledger. Sometimes rarity is about survival, about what escaped when the rules changed, about what remained when a door quietly closed behind it. Men who had spent decades handling coins began to realize what they were holding. These were not just pennies. These were witnesses, evidence of a moment when America altered its material identity, even if it didn't realize it at the time. The weight difference alone told a story. The feel in the hand was unmistakable to those who knew. Heavier, denser, more substantial. It felt like the pennies of childhood, not the lighter, hollow-feeling sense that came later. And yet the date said 1982. That contradiction is where power lives. Because the 1982 D penny exists at the crossroads of two eras. It looks forward and backward at the same time. It represents the last breath of copper dominance and the first step into modern cost-cutting reality. For men who lived through the early 1980s, this matters. This was a time of inflation, uncertainty, and recalibration. Interest rates soared. Manufacturing shifted. The economy tightened. The nation adapted. And the penny adapted with it. This coin is not just metal. It is context. Every mark on its surface carries the pressure of that year. The sharpness of Lincoln's jawline. The depth of the lettering. The way light reflects differently off copper versus zinc beneath copper plating. These details become meaningful once you understand what you are looking at. Collectors today do not chase this coin because it is old. They chase it because it should not exist in the way it does. It is a byproduct of transition, and transition coins are among the most dangerous things to ignore. Most were lost, melted, spent, forgotten. Zinc versions flooded circulation and replaced them so completely that few people ever thought to separate, preserve, or protect the heavier survivors. Time worked against them. And that is why surviving examples in strong condition command attention now. Not hype, not trend. Attention earned through scarcity and understanding. When a man holds one today, he is holding a physical reminder of when value quietly shifted behind the scenes. When what something was made of changed without asking permission. When the smallest denomination reflected a larger economic truth. That is why this coin resonates with a certain generation. It is not flashy. It does not shout. It does not beg for attention. It waits for recognition. And recognition, when it finally arrives, is never gentle. The 1982 D penny has crossed a threshold in recent years. No longer dismissed. No longer considered background noise. It has become studied, verified, documented through physical characteristics that cannot be faked by stories or speculation. Weight, composition, strike quality, surface response, and preservation now determine its standing. This is no longer about luck. It is about knowledge. And knowledge separates what is spent from what is saved. What makes this coin powerful is not just its metal, but its timing. It represents the last moment before a permanent shift. Once the transition was complete, there was no going back. Copper was gone from the penny forever. That makes every authentic surviving example a finite object. No new ones will ever be created. No reproduction will ever carry the same legitimacy. No future issue can replicate that moment. It happened once. And that is why the conversation has changed. Men who once ignored jars of pennies now examine them under proper light. They weigh them carefully. They listen to the sound they make when dropped gently on a hard surface. They compare edges. They look closer than they ever did before. Because they understand something now that most people still do not. Sometimes the most important objects are hiding in plain sight. And sometimes what appears worthless today is simply waiting for the right moment to be understood. The 1982 D Lincoln cent is no longer just a penny. It is a line in history you can hold in your hand. The year 1976 carries a weight that few other dates in American history can claim. It was not just another year on the calendar. It was a statement. 200 years after independence, the nation paused to look at itself. There were parades, speeches, flags everywhere, and a deep sense of reflection. America was asking who it had been, what it had survived, and what it was becoming. And while fireworks lit the sky and history books revisited old victories, the U.S. Mint continued doing what it always does during moments of national importance. It struck coins. Most people remember the bicentennial designs. The quarter with the drummer boy, the $50 with Independence Hall, the dollar with the Liberty Bell and the moon. Those coins announced themselves loudly. They were meant to be noticed, collected, celebrated. But something else was happening at the same time, quietly, without ceremony. The Lincoln 1-cent coin of 1976 did not change its design. There was no special reverse. No bold anniversary message. No visual celebration of 2 centuries of independence. It stayed exactly the same. And that decision, intentional or not, created one of the most misunderstood and underestimated coins of the era. The 1976 Lincoln cent with no mint mark was struck in Philadelphia, at a time when the mint mark itself was often absent from coins made there. To most people, that absence meant nothing. To collectors who understand context, it means everything. This penny was produced during a year when the nation was hyper-aware of symbolism. Yet this coin chose continuity over spectacle. It represents stability in a time of reflection, routine in a moment of celebration. That contrast matters. By 1976, America had already been through Vietnam, economic turbulence, inflation, and social upheaval. Confidence had been tested. Trust had been strained. The bicentennial was not just a party, it was reassurance. And the penny, unchanged, steady, familiar, became part of that reassurance. Millions were struck, yes, pennies always are. But mass production does not automatically erase future importance, especially when time, survival, and condition step into the equation. Most 1976 pennies were treated as they always had been. Spent immediately, dropped into circulation, tossed into jars, used until worn smooth. No one was setting them aside in protective holders. No one was thinking about long-term preservation. Why would they? It looked like every other penny. But history does not reward what looks different. It rewards what survives intact. The copper-based composition of the 1976 cent is critical here. This was still the era of solid copper pennies, before the transition that would come just a few years later. These coins carry real material weight, both literally and symbolically. They are heavier, warmer in tone, more resistant to the hollow corrosion issues that plague later zinc-based cents. When properly preserved, they age with dignity rather than decay. That is why condition matters so intensely with this coin. A 1976 penny that spent decades rattling around in circulation tells one story. A 1976 penny that somehow escaped heavy wear tells a completely different one. Sharp details on Lincoln's hair. Full separation in the lettering. Clean fields without excessive contact marks. Original luster still clinging to the surface instead of being stripped away by time and handling. These characteristics are no longer common. Philadelphia struck massive quantities, but quantity does not equal quality. The vast majority were used hard. The survivors that remain in exceptional condition today are a fraction of what once existed. And here is where the psychology of collectors over 35 truly connects. This generation remembers 1976. They remember where they were. They remember the mood of the country. They remember bicentennial celebrations in schools, neighborhoods, and on television. That emotional memory gives the coin gravity. This is not abstract history. This is lived experience. When a man holds a 1976 penny today and sees it preserved, sharp, and untouched, it feels like time folded in on itself. It looks the way things were supposed to look back then. Clean, purposeful, solid. That emotional response drives demand far more than novelty ever could. Another overlooked factor is quality control. During the mid-1970s, the mint was operating at high speed to meet circulation demands. Speed always introduces risk. Subtle striking variations, pressure inconsistencies, and surface anomalies occurred more often than most people realize. Coins that emerged perfectly struck, centered, and clean were not guaranteed. They were the exception, not the rule. Those exceptions are now separated from the rest. There is also the matter of what came later. The 1980s brought change. Cheaper metals, lighter coins, a subtle loss of substance that most people felt without being able to articulate. When collectors look backward from that point, the pre-1982 copper cents gain an extra layer of appreciation. They represent the end of something. The 1976 no mint mark penny stands firmly on the right side of that line. It is old enough to carry historical weight, yet modern enough to feel familiar. That combination is rare. Coins that are too old feel distant. Coins that are too new feel irrelevant. This one sits in the middle where connection lives. That is why advanced collectors pay attention to details others miss. The color consistency, the absence of cleaning, the microscopic preservation of mint luster that only appears when a coin was never mishandled. These are not accidents. They are survivals. And survivals are what define value over time. This coin does not demand attention. It earns it slowly, quietly, through patience. As years continue to pass, fewer pristine examples remain. Copper reacts with the environment. Storage conditions matter. Handling leaves permanent evidence. Each year reduces the population of truly exceptional survivors. That shrinking population is what changes perception. What was once just a penny becomes a benchmark, a reference point, a standard of what preservation looks like from a year that mattered deeply to the nation. The 1976 Lincoln cent without a mint mark is not famous. It is not flashy. It does not ride trends. It waits. And waiting, in the world of serious collecting, is often the most powerful position of all. Because when recognition finally arrives, it is never loud. It is decisive. The early 1990s felt stable on the surface. The Cold War had ended. Technology was accelerating. The economy was adjusting but not collapsing. Life moved forward with a sense of normal rhythm. There were no dramatic shocks forcing people to stop and reassess the smallest details of everyday objects. And that is exactly why certain things slipped through unnoticed. The 1992 Lincoln 1-cent coin with no mint mark was born into that calm. Produced in Philadelphia, it entered circulation without fanfare, without controversy, without any reason for the public to question it. It looked like every other penny people had been using for years. That familiarity became its disguise. By 1992, pennies had already transitioned to zinc cores with copper plating. The heavier copper cents of earlier decades were gone. The feel had changed, the sound had changed, and for many people the emotional connection had faded slightly, even if they couldn't explain why. The penny had become lighter, cheaper, more disposable. And yet, even in this era of efficiency and cost control, precision still mattered. The mint was striking billions of coins, but within those billions, perfection was never guaranteed. The 1992 no-mint mark penny represents a moment when modern mass production met human limitation. To the untrained eye, it is unremarkable. Lincoln's portrait appears calm and familiar. The date sits cleanly beneath him. The absence of a mint mark means nothing to most people. It simply indicates Philadelphia, just as it had for decades. But to collectors who understand what to look for, this coin occupies a very specific and important position. By the early 1990s, coin production had reached a level of speed and volume that left little margin for error. Dies were used longer. Quality control focused on quantity rather than microscopic perfection. Coins that met basic standards were released into circulation without hesitation. That environment creates a paradox. The more coins that are made, the harder it becomes to find truly flawless survivors. A penny from 1992 that remains sharply struck, well-centered, clean, and untouched today is not common. It is rare in practice, even if it was not rare in theory. Most were used immediately, passed through vending machines, dropped onto hard surfaces, scraped against other coins, exposed to moisture, heat, oils from hands, and years of friction. Zinc-based pennies are unforgiving. Once the copper plating is breached, corrosion begins quickly. Blistering, bubbling, discoloration, and surface decay destroy the coin's integrity. That is why preservation matters more for modern pennies than for older copper ones. A 1992 penny that remains intact tells a story of escape. It avoided circulation. It avoided damage. It avoided the slow, invisible decay that consumes most zinc cents over time. That alone separates it from millions of others. But there is more. The early 1990s marked the last period before digital transactions began accelerating. Cash was still dominant. Coins still moved constantly. Pennies circulated heavily. They were used, not collected. Almost no one in 1992 was setting aside pennies with long-term value in mind. That lack of foresight is what creates future scarcity. Collectors today in the 35 to 65 plus age range lived through this period. They handled these coins daily. They remember buying coffee, newspapers, gas, groceries, all with physical money. The penny was part of routine life. Seeing a pristine example now creates a disconnect. It looks wrong in a way. Too clean, too sharp, too untouched for something that was supposed to be everywhere. That contradiction drives interest. The absence of a mint mark also plays a psychological role. It suggests simplicity, but it also hides origin. Without the letter, the coin does not announce where it came from. It forces the observer to know, not assume. Knowledge becomes the gatekeeper. Philadelphia coins of this era were produced in staggering numbers, but that volume also meant faster wear on dies. Fine details softened more quickly. Crisp strikes became less consistent. Coins with full detail across Lincoln's hair, jawline, and coat are not the norm. Finding one today requires patience, understanding, and often luck. The market has slowly begun to recognize this, not through hype but through comparison. When collectors line up examples side by side, the differences become obvious. Most are dull. Most are damaged. Most are compromised in some way. The exceptional ones stand apart immediately. They reflect light differently. They hold detail longer. They feel intentional rather than accidental. This is where modern coins surprise people. Age alone does not determine importance. Survival does. A 1992 penny that looks ordinary at first glance but reveals extraordinary preservation under closer inspection challenges assumptions. It forces a reassessment of what value actually means. It is not always about how old something is. It is about how well it endured. Men who have spent decades working, building, and maintaining understand this instinctively. Tools that last matter. Materials that hold up matter. Things that survive without shortcuts earn respect. This penny fits that mindset. It comes from a time when efficiency was prioritized, but excellence still emerged despite the system, not because of it. That makes it meaningful. Another factor often overlooked is attrition. Zinc pennies do not age gracefully. Each year, thousands are removed from circulation due to corrosion, damage, or rejection by machines. Banks discard them. Businesses refuse them. They are quietly eliminated. That ongoing loss reduces the surviving population constantly. The 1992 no-mint mark penny is now over 3 decades old. For a zinc coin, that is significant. Many from that year no longer exist in acceptable condition. The window for finding top-tier examples narrows every year. And unlike older coins, there is no romantic narrative protecting them. No one rushes to save modern pennies. They disappear unnoticed. Until they don't. At some point, perception shifts. Collectors look back and realize a gap has formed. Certain dates become harder to find in high quality. Prices adjust not because of speculation but because of absence. The 1992 penny is entering that phase. It is no longer abundant in exceptional condition. It is no longer easy to replace once lost. And it represents a period of American life that feels closer than it actually is. That closeness creates emotional pull. This coin does not shout history. It whispers it, quietly, persistently, to those willing to listen. And that is often how the most powerful stories are told. By 1984, America was moving fast again. The uncertainty of the late 1970s had given way to confidence. Industry was reorganizing. Markets were adapting. Technology was beginning to reshape daily life. Even if most people didn't yet realize how deeply it would go, there was a sense of forward motion, of momentum returning. And in the middle of that movement, the penny was still doing its job. Quietly, constantly, without recognition. The 1984 Lincoln 1-cent coin came from the Denver Mint during a period when speed and volume were no longer negotiable. Pennies were needed everywhere, every day. They flowed through gas stations, grocery stores, factories, payphones, and lunch counters. The coin was no longer symbolic. It was functional. That function-first mentality shaped how these coins were made. By this time, the composition shift had already taken place. Zinc cores with copper plating were standard. The heavier copper cents were gone, replaced by something lighter, cheaper, and more fragile. The change was accepted quickly by the public, mostly because no one stopped to question it. But fragility has consequences. The 1984 penny entered circulation in enormous numbers, but it also entered an environment that was unforgiving. Zinc cents do not tolerate abuse. They do not forgive scratches, moisture, or pressure. Once damaged, they deteriorate rapidly. This means that while millions were produced, far fewer survived intact. The Denver Mint in the mid-1980s was under pressure to maintain output. dies were pushed hard. Replacement schedules were not always ideal. This resulted in variability that most people never noticed, but specialists now study closely. Strike quality varied. Some coins came out sharp and balanced. Others showed softness in critical areas. Lincoln's hair detail, cheekbone definition, and coat lines became points of differentiation. Most 1984 D pennies you see today are tired, worn, discolored, compromised by time and handling. They reflect decades of circulation, contact, and neglect. A truly clean example feels almost unnatural. And that is exactly what makes it powerful. Men who understand machinery, production, and systems recognize what this means. When output is maximized, quality becomes inconsistent. Exceptional results become rarer, not because they weren't possible, but because conditions did not favor them. A well-preserved 1984 D penny is evidence of resistance. It resisted circulation. It resisted damage. It resisted time. That resistance is not accidental. These coins were not collected at the time. No one was protecting them. No one was placing them into holders or albums with future value in mind. Pennies were still viewed as expendable. That perception is the enemy of preservation. Most 1984 D cents were dropped into change jars, glove compartments, or cash drawers and forgotten. Zinc plating chipped. Corrosion began. Once the surface integrity was breached, the coin's fate was sealed. Survivors that avoided this process are now separated sharply from the rest. Another overlooked element is the psychology of the mid-1980s. This was not a nostalgic period when people saved things. It was a period of consumption and movement. Old habits were replaced quickly. Objects were used and discarded without ceremony. Coins suffered because of this mindset. That makes intact examples from this era disproportionately scarce compared to their original numbers. Collectors today examine these coins differently than they once did. They look for original surface texture, for uninterrupted copper plating, for luster that has not been stripped away by cleaning or friction. They look for balance, for a strike that feels intentional rather than rushed. When they find it, they pause, because they know what it took for that coin to arrive here unchanged. The Denver Mint mark adds another layer of identity. Unlike Philadelphia's no mint mark coins, the D announces origin. It ties the coin to a specific place, a specific facility, a specific production culture. Denver coins from this period have their own character. Slight differences in pressure, die life, and output rhythm create patterns that experienced eyes can recognize. This turns the coin into more than currency. It becomes a fingerprint. For men aged 35 to 65 and beyond, the 1984 D penny connects to working years, to routines, to a time when cash still mattered and coins still passed through hands daily. It was part of life's background noise. Seeing one preserved today disrupts that memory. It looks frozen, removed from the chaos it was meant to endure. That contrast creates gravity. And gravity attracts attention. The longer time passes, the more the separation grows. Damaged coins are removed from circulation. Zinc decay accelerates. Environmental exposure does its work quietly and efficiently. What remains is a shrinking pool. Not of coins, but of quality. That is the distinction most people miss. The 1984 D Lincoln cent is no longer defined by how many were made. It is defined by how many survived intact. And survival, in the collecting world, is everything. This coin does not rely on legend or speculation. It relies on evidence, on physical condition, on the reality of material behavior over time. It stands as proof that even in an era of mass production, excellence could still emerge quietly, unnoticed, and uncelebrated. Until now. The year 1973 sits in an uncomfortable place in American memory. It was not celebrated. It was not nostalgic. It was tense, uncertain, and heavy. The Vietnam War was winding down, but the cost was everywhere. Trust in institutions was shaken. Inflation was rising. The oil crisis loomed. Confidence was fragile. And through all of this, life still had to function. People still worked, still paid bills, still bought groceries, still handed over coins without thinking about what those coins represented. The 1973 Lincoln 1-cent coin with no mint mark was born into that pressure. Struck in Philadelphia, it carried no letter to announce its origin. It did not stand out. It did not ask to be noticed. It simply entered circulation and did what it was meant to do. And that is precisely why it matters now. By 1973, the penny was still solid copper. Real metal, substantial, durable, could take abuse and still survive. But durability does not guarantee preservation. In fact, durability often invites neglect. People assume strong things will last forever, so they treat them carelessly. The 1973 penny was used relentlessly. It passed through hands at a time when cash dominated every transaction. Pennies mattered then. They were counted, needed, and circulated constantly. No one was saving them. This was not a year associated with optimism or celebration. It was a year of endurance. Objects were tools, not keepsakes. That mindset shaped survival rates more than mintage numbers ever could. Most 1973 pennies were worn down naturally. Edges softened. Details faded. Contact marks accumulated. Surfaces dulled. Over time, they blended into the background of everyday money. Only a small fraction escaped that fate. Those that did tell a different story. A well-preserved 1973 no-mint mark penny feels deliberate. It feels protected. It feels like it somehow avoided a decade that consumed everything around it. Collectors recognize this instantly. Lincoln's portrait on these coins, when sharply struck, carries a quiet authority. The jawline is firm. The hair detail is intact. The lettering is crisp and confident. The fields are clean, not because they were cleaned, but because they were never abused. Original luster on a copper coin from this era is not common. It requires isolation from circulation, moisture, and handling. It requires someone somewhere to have done nothing. That is often harder than doing something. The absence of a mint mark again plays its role. It makes the coin anonymous to the casual observer. But to someone who knows, it ties the piece to Philadelphia's production environment at a time of stress and volume. Philadelphia was producing enormous quantities of coins under economic pressure. Speed mattered. Efficiency mattered. Perfection was secondary. Coins that came out perfectly struck, evenly toned, and undisturbed were not the standard. They were the exception. Those exceptions are now isolated, identified, and pursued. Another factor that elevates the 1973 penny is generational perspective. Men who lived through that period understand what it felt like. The uncertainty, the seriousness, the lack of excess. This coin comes from a time when nothing felt disposable, yet everything was used until it wore out. That irony gives the penny weight beyond metal. It is also one of the last chapters before long-term decline in the penny's perceived importance. Over the following decades, inflation would erode its purchasing power. Eventually, it would become almost symbolic rather than functional. But in 1973, it still mattered. That relevance makes preserved examples feel anchored in reality rather than nostalgia. As decades passed, copper prices rose. Pennies were hoarded, melted, removed from circulation. Many were damaged in the process. Others were simply lost. The surviving population thinned quietly. What remains today is not defined by how many were struck, but by how many endured without compromise. This is where serious collectors focus their attention. They understand that coins from difficult years carry an honesty that cannot be manufactured. They were not created to commemorate. They were created to function. And when function meets survival, value follows. The 1973 Lincoln cent without a mint mark is no longer invisible to those who know what they are looking at. It has crossed from background object to historical artifact. Not because it changed, but because time changed everything around it. And now, after understanding all 5 coins, after stripping away assumptions and looking at context, survival, and meaning, the numbers finally make sense. Not as hype. Not as fantasy. As outcomes. The 1982 D. Lincoln 1-cent coin stands at a value of $5,600. The 1976 Lincoln 1-cent coin with no mint mark stands at a value of $6,800. The 1992 Lincoln 1-cent coin with no mint mark stands at a value of $6,700. The 1984 D. Lincoln 1-cent coin stands at a value of $8,054. And the 1973 Lincoln 1-cent coin with no mint mark stands at a value of $1.99, 300. These are not just prices. They are the result of time, survival, and understanding, and most people will never see them coming.